Christian Horner's presence at Formula One's 2024 pre-season test while an investigation takes place into allegations against him means an awkward and tense situation hangs over his Red Bull team in Bahrain. This was highlighted in a brief but uncomfortable exchange during Horner's appearance as Red Bull's representative in a team principal's press conference on day 2 of pre-season testing, organised by F1 as part of this event's official media activity. Horner continues in his roles as Red Bull Racing CEO and team principal while the investigation ordered by Red Bull's parent company takes place. He was front and centre at Red Bull's 2024 F1 car launch, and he remains the team's figurehead at testing too. During the launch, Horner rebuffed questions from the media about the ongoing process while expressing gratitude for the support he's received from inside the organisation and emphasising it remains business as normal at Red Bull Racing while the investigation runs its course. He faced only 2 specific further questions on the matter during this Bahrain press conference, and both were met with a sidestep and versions of "I cannot comment on this," but Horner's response to 2 differently framed queries conveyed different tones. The first question was directed at Horner alongside one to McLaren Racing CEO Zak Brown, asking Brown to comment about how it's been handled, the length of time it's taking, the fact he's still in his role, and what it says about Formula One's attitude to sexual equality. The second part to Horner asked, "You said it was business as usual at Red Bull, but it's not business as usual when the CEO is accused of inappropriate behaviour. How can people take this investigation seriously when you've not been asked to step aside while it's been in process?" Brown answered first, calling the allegations extremely serious, and with reference to the Red Bull investigation, stressed that we hope and assume that will be handled in a very transparent way, adding that this is creating headlines F1 doesn't want or need. Horner's reply to his question was slightly curt, saying, "As you're well aware, there's a process going on that I form part of, and as I form part of that process, I'm afraid I cannot comment on it." Horner's expression and tone softened for the next question, which followed immediately. That question focused on Horner's admission during the car launch that the investigation had been a distraction in the build-up to the new season, and asked him whether that continued over this past week. The question also referenced Formula One's statement, asking for the matter to be resolved at the earliest opportunity, given it's a bad look for F1 as a whole to have something like this hanging over the championship, and asked Horner if he'd been given any timeline for when it may be clarified, so the distraction, if it is a distraction, is no longer there. Horner's response: "Look, I'm dreadfully sorry, but I really can't comment on the process or timescale. I think obviously everybody would like a conclusion as soon as possible, but I'm really not at liberty to comment about the process." Our man Scott Mitchell-Mao is in Bahrain for the test and was in this press conference when Horner faced those questions. Here's what he made of the whole thing.
Christian Horner was the elephant in the room at his team's car launch, and his presence at pre-season testing was always going to be a big talking point. None less so than when he faced us, the media, in an F1 press conference on day 2. This was an official F1 media duty, and Horner is continuing in his roles while this investigation is ongoing, so he was always going to be front and centre. Because nothing was really said at the launch when he was asked about the process, and he said he couldn't talk about the process, there weren't many questions, but the questions that were asked clearly riled him up. There was a sort of tension in his voice when he gave a no comment to the first question, which may have been a result of the way the question was framed, or it might have been because Horner had to sit there while Zak Brown talked about him and the allegations and the investigation, and that riled him up. But the tension was clear. This is an awkward, tense, uncomfortable situation for Horner, for Red Bull, for a lot of people. And afterwards, the size of the talking point was obvious when the Netflix cameras chased Horner out of the press conference room and back to hospitality all the way.
The first senior F1 figure to address the situation publicly was Horner's old rival Toto Wolff of Mercedes. He was the only team boss willing to answer the same question as Brown just 24 hours earlier, and like Brown eventually did, Wolff stressed the need for transparency and rigour in Red Bull's investigation. Wolff also pointed to Formula One's push for greater inclusion, diversity, equality and fairness, and said it was important that actions met words in this regard, given F1's position as a global sport and, in Wolff's words, one of the most important sport platforms in the world, in which the participants, including its team principals, must act as role models. Wolff also talked about the need for a rigorous process in Red Bull's investigation and the importance of F1 as a whole learning lessons from that once the outcome is known. The championship's main stakeholders, Liberty Media as the commercial rights holder and the FIA as the governing body, have said precious little on this matter so far. Formula One management expressed hope that the matter will be clarified at the earliest opportunity after a fair and thorough process, before stressing that no further comment would be made. This has been interpreted as a hurry-up in some quarters, but mainly it reflects a desire for the issue to be resolved as soon as possible without shortcutting the process. The FIA issued its own statement shortly after and said even less, simply saying they won't comment while the investigation is ongoing and emphasising the organisation's stated commitment to upholding standards of integrity, fairness and inclusivity within the championship it regulates. Horner has been in the garage and Red Bull hospitality unit throughout the first 2 days of testing, initially in plain clothing, as is customary for senior Red Bull personnel at these events. The likes of Adrian Newey and Helmut Marko have been informally dressed this week too. And as at the car launch, Horner has publicly appeared as Red Bull's spokesperson too. So there is no sign of Horner relinquishing his Red Bull duties while this is ongoing. This will only extend the awkward conflict between a very public role, a very prominent situation, and an inability or unwillingness to discuss it. Red Bull's initial statement made it clear it wanted to resolve the matter as soon as realistically possible without compromising the process. It's a complicated and long-running issue that, going back to before the formal investigation started and the allegations first emerged, has now spanned several weeks. A significant amount of time has been devoted to speaking to Horner and the person who's made the allegations. Realistically, it was not expected to be resolved before the opening race of the season in Bahrain, but it has been suggested, due to so much speculation and misinformation being shared, it could be finalised as early as next week, as the situation risks running out of control. Contrary to an incorrect claim that spread across social media recently, a decision has not already been made. It was said that Viaplay Finland's coverage of testing included a declaration that Red Bull had opted to sack Horner, and this would be formally announced soon. But we understand that some speculation about Horner was addressed on the broadcast, but no such firm declaration was made. Instead, what was said was misinterpreted and mistranslated. Viaplay even moved to clarify that once it became aware of what spread on social media. Red Bull Racing has directed all inquiries on this matter to the parent company in Austria. The team itself is staying quiet for now, but one of its biggest partners, 2026 engine associate Ford, has addressed the matter and stressed that it expects very high standards of behaviour and integrity from its partners as well as from itself. Ford thinks the fact Red Bull is taking the matter so seriously means Red Bull is also concerned about any potential reputational damage to its brand, but Ford is also sensibly waiting for the outcome before commenting further. This comment from Ford came around the same time as a report in the Financial Times claiming Ford had written to Red Bull urging it to be transparent and thorough with its investigation and resolve it as quickly as realistically possible. At the same press conference, Horner also had to address more questions about his team's technical partnership with the team formerly known as Toro Rosso, formerly known as AlphaTauri, now known as RB. We declared the RB F1 2024's most controversial car when it was launched, and Red Bull's partner team is definitely coming under more scrutiny during testing. The idea that the RB is some kind of Red Bull clone and that the collaboration between Red Bull's two F1 teams is too close for comfort looks at this stage to be more of an imagined conspiracy than a real problem, but that hasn't stopped McLaren CEO Zak Brown in particular from raising it every chance he gets. He was at it again on day 2 in Bahrain, lining up alongside Horner and new RB team principal Laurent Mekies in the press conference and throwing yet more shade at a partnership he feels has no place in modern F1. Brown has a valid point, of course, that common ownership of teams is not a healthy situation, but by conflating it with suggestions of some imagined collusion on car design, he has seriously weakened his argument and allowed Horner to adopt a comfortable defensive position that trumpets Red Bull's very significant contribution to the health of the grid during F1's lean times without addressing the real issue. We got our resident F1 technical expert Gary Anderson to cast his discerning eye over the RB now it's finally broken cover, and his verdict is that RB's 2024 car is basically an approximation of Red Bull's 2023 one, but that's true for most of the rest of the grid too, as teams have picked up on obvious visual cues from F1 2023's most dominant car and attempted to incorporate those ideas. Subtle details on the wings, side pods and other vital aero surfaces show that RB is most definitely following its own path, as mandated by F1's regulations, and simply taking advantage of the opportunity to utilise Red Bull's mechanical platform. That's not really any different to what Aston Martin does with the Mercedes rear end, or what Haas does with Ferrari's complete suspension system. In Anderson's view, the 2024 RB is no more a copy of the 2023 Red Bull than any other car on the grid. The fires Red Bull had to fight weren't just blazing off track in Bahrain, as the front right brake caught fire after Sergio Perez's first run in the 2024 car. That's how Red Bull's second day of pre-season testing started, and it finished with Red Bull trailing Ferrari by 0.7 of a second. So, should Red Bull be starting to worry it's facing a bigger threat on track as well? Judging by Charles Leclerc's comments, probably not. He says Red Bull remains the reference for the rest of the 2024 grid. Focusing purely on Ferrari, testing has been promising but unspectacular so far. Although Carlos Sainz topped the second day of running with the only sub 1 minute 30-second lap of the test, it took the C4, the second softest tyre in the range, to do it. And the day wasn't plain sailing, as Leclerc sustained floor damage when he hit a drain cover at the entry to turn 11. That led to a change of floor and Sainz making a delayed start to the afternoon's running. Overall, the Ferrari SF24 is working as hoped. It's a step forward in terms of the front-end feel and rear stability, while it's also proving to be a little less wind-sensitive than last year's car. The only trouble is that while Ferrari looks absolutely in the pack jostling for second, Red Bull appears out of reach. The ease of the Max Verstappen lap time on day one has alarmed other teams, and the mileage racked up over 2 days, even with a couple of setbacks, has been mighty. Nothing about this car, nothing about the way this test is going for Red Bull is suggesting it is anything other than a clear step on from last year and the benchmark yet again. Some people in the paddock are starting to fear Red Bull might even have a bigger advantage than in 2023. We can't say that for certain yet, but one thing is clear. The RB20 has left a big and quite worrying impression on a lot of people in the F1 paddock, which, to the team at least, will be a big silver lining in the cloud that hangs over Red Bull ahead of the new season.